Ever think about like how easily our sense of reality could just completely fall apart? Like, what if something that feels so real to one person just sounds totally crazy to someone else? Today, we're going to dive into something really strange. What if someone's on drugs and they actually think they are living in the Air Buddies movies? So, yeah, we're going to try to understand that.
Yeah, it's wild how our brains build our perception of the world. And when you really mess with that, like you can with drugs, the things people experience might be really unusual, but they could feel completely real to the person going through it.
Absolutely. And you gave me some fascinating stuff to look at for this. We've got the science behind how drugs can change perception,
Yeah.
how different substances can tweak the way our brains process information. And then, on a completely different note, we've got this really charming world of Air Buddies, those movies with those adorable pecking golden retriever puppies. So, what we're trying to do in this deep dive is to figure out how those two things could somehow come together in someone's mind and make them truly believe it.
So to really get this, we gotta dig into something from psychiatry called the influencing machine. Now I know that sounds like something straight out of sci-fi, but it's actually a way to understand how people in certain altered states can start believing they're being controlled by, machines or forces outside of themselves. Think of it like a way to understand a really specific type of delusion.
Gotcha. So, okay, imagine this. Our guy, let's call him Luke, is high on something. But he doesn't just think he's high. He's convinced he's stuck inside some alien-controlled influencing machine, and it's projecting the whole Air Buddies universe right into his head. Sounds pretty out there, right? So let's try to break down how someone could actually start believing that.
So the whole idea of the influencing machine, as psychiatrists see it, comes from people who develop these complex delusional systems. They often talk about being controlled by, invisible gadgets or powerful forces, and these experiences can show up in all sorts of ways.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? What kinds of things do people say these machines are doing to them?
Well, one common thing is seeing pictures, almost like there's a movie projector inside their head.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, they usually don't describe it as like a full 3D hallucination. It's more like flat images, like someone's projecting onto a screen.
So it's like they're seeing a 2D screen inside their own minds.
Exactly. Another big thing is feeling like thoughts and emotions are being put into their heads or taken out by these external forces. They describe these influences as waves or rays or some kind of energy, and they feel like someone's messing with their very core.
So it's not just their senses, it's their thoughts and feelings that feel alien, like they're coming from outside.
Exactly. And then you also have the physical sensations connected to these imagined machines. This can be anything from involuntary movements or weird feelings in their body. Sometimes they describe it as electrical or magnetic, to actually believing the machine is causing things like skin rashes.
Wow, that sounds really unsettling, like it affects their whole world. But why would someone develop such a complex belief like this?
The main idea is that the belief in an influencing machine comes from this need to explain feelings of detachment, weird sensory experiences, and this overall sense that reality has just gone haywire. It's like their mind is scrambling to find some kind of explanation for all this bizarre and often really disturbing stuff that's going on inside by pinning it on something external. So the key takeaway here is these really elaborate delusional systems usually don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're often a desperate attempt by the mind to explain really weird and unsettling internal experiences by projecting them outward.
So believing in the machine becomes a way to give these experiences a framework, even if it's a strange one, just so they can make sense of something that feels completely unexplainable.
Yeah, kind of. There's also this psychoanalytic perspective that suggests these machines could be symbolic representations of the patient's own body, or even their sexuality projected outward as the source of all these confusing and overwhelming sensations.
Oh wow, that adds another layer to it. So it's like these machines are externalized internal conflicts. Okay, so we've got this idea of the influencing machine as a way for the mind to interpret these altered states. Now, how do drugs actually lead someone like Luke to think he's in an Air Buddy simulation being controlled by aliens?
This is where the Bayesian framework becomes really helpful. Think of your brain as constantly making predictions about what's going to happen next based on what you already know. That's the top-down part. Then it compares those predictions to what your senses are actually telling you. That's the bottom up. The Bayesian framework describes how your brain is always trying to balance these two things to create your perception of reality. So basically, drugs throw off this whole prediction correction process and make internal beliefs or external stimuli feel way more real or significant than they actually are.
And I guess different drugs mess with this balance in different ways.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For example, research shows that some drugs like ketamine can really amp up these things called bottom-up prediction error signals. This is basically the mismatch between what your brain expects and what it actually perceives.
So normally these error signals help us update our understanding of the world, right?
Exactly. But when they get cranked up, even normal sensory input can feel super meaningful and like it needs an explanation. This can lead to ideas of reference, where people think that random events or other people's actions are directed specifically at them.
Like when a character on TV winks and they think it's a personal message.
Exactly like that. Now, on the other hand, you have drugs like LSD. Some theories say that LSD might mess up the bottom-up processing of sensory information, but leave the top-down processing, your existing beliefs and expectations, mostly untouched.
So the raw sensory data gets all jumbled up, but the brain is still trying to make sense of it based on what it already knows.
Right. In this case, the brain might basically start hallucinating, creating perceptions without anything really triggering them in the outside world. Like the brain is filling in the blanks with what it already strongly believes, even if the sensory information is weak or unreliable.
That makes sense for why people on LSD might see things that aren't really there. What about drugs like amphetamines?
Using amphetamines a lot can lead to higher levels of dopamine in the brain. Dopamine is involved in how we decide what's important or salient around us. When dopamine levels get messed up, it can create a state of aberrant salience where the world feels incredibly meaningful, but in a chaotic and sometimes paranoid way.
Okay, so we understand how drugs can change perception. We've got this influencing machine idea to explain those bizarre sensations. Now, let's go back to Luke in our Air Buddies scenario. He's high, and he thinks he's in this machine run by aliens that's showing him the whole puppy adventure. How do these pieces come together for him?
Well, from Luke's perspective, the drugs are changing his normal sensory input, and he's interpreting those changes through this idea of an alien-controlled machine that's running an Air Buddies simulation. Remember the Air Buddies movies with those talking golden retriever puppies like Butterball and all their adventures where they go to a donut shop or get kidnapped by dog nappers? It's a world he knows, even if it's a little wacky.
Right, it's familiar territory, even if it is kind of silly. So how does his altered perception fit into that specific world?
Because his brain's normal processing is all messed up, Luke might zero in on little details in the Air Buddies world. He's seeing like a specific way a puppy's tail wags or the tone of their voice. And because of that increased bottom-up processing, we talk about these normal things might suddenly feel really significant. You might think that the puppy's talking or doing things isn't just like being puppies, but actually messages or manipulation from the aliens who are running the simulation. They're doing it all to mess with them.
So like Butterball loving snacks isn't just a cute thing, it's a secret message from the aliens.
Exactly. And in the same way, any feelings of being detached from his body, or weird physical sensations caused by the drugs, could fit right into this belief system. He might think a feeling of floating means the aliens are messing with gravity inside the Air Buddies simulation, or if he feels tingling, he might think it's the machine connecting directly to his nerves in that reality.
So the physical effects of the drugs become part of the story of being stuck inside this machine.
Precisely. And let's think about the influencing part. If Luke experiences something like thought insertion, that feeling that thoughts are being put into his mind, which can happen when you're high, he might think the aliens controlling the Air Buddies simulation are literally putting words in his mouth or controlling the puppies to influence what he thinks and does inside that simulated world.
So it's like the aliens aren't just showing him the movie, they're writing his part in it using the Air Buddies as their puppets.
That's how it might feel to Luke. Even if he has muscle twitches from the drugs, he could interpret that through this lens. A leg spasm could feel like the alien's taking control of his Air Buddy's avatar, making him do things he doesn't want to do in the simulation. It's like he's losing his sense of control in this puppy-filled reality.
So he's not just watching the movie anymore, he's a character in it being controlled by these alien puppet masters in this Air Buddies story.
And the key thing is, Luke already knows all about Air Buddies. So that gives him a strong a framework in his mind for making sense of all these crazy drug-induced perceptions. The sensory distortions and strange thoughts from the drugs are filtered through this familiar, even if it's out there, mental schema. So believing in this alien-controlled Air Buddies simulation, no matter how weird it seems to anyone else, actually becomes a pretty logical explanation for his totally altered state of mind. It's like his brain is saying, okay, something's definitely wrong, but wait, I know these talking puppies, this must be what's happening.
So the familiar becomes the way he understands the unfamiliar and bizarre.
Basically, yeah. And this connects to the bigger idea of feeling controlled by external forces, which can happen in all sorts of altered states of perception.
So feeling like he's being manipulated by aliens inside the Air Buddies simulation is just a specific example of a more general feeling of losing control.
Exactly. If the brain can't properly monitor its own actions, if it's hard to tell the difference between your own thoughts and outside influences that can make you feel like you're just a pawn in this alien-run Air Buddies world, Luke might not even recognize his own intentions or actions as his own inside the simulation. Yeah, they might feel like they're coming from the alien controllers.
It's a really fascinating and kind of creepy example of how the mind tries to find meaning and make things make sense, even when it's dealing with completely distorted information. So to recap, we've talked about the influencing machine idea as a way to understand how delusional beliefs happen. We looked at how drugs can totally change our perception through the Bayesian model, messing up that delicate balance between what we expect and what our senses tell us, and we saw how these ideas can come together to create this very specific, and to Luke, very real belief that he's living in an alien-controlled Air Buddies simulation.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, what this deep dive really shows you is how powerful the brain is and its need to create a story, to find some explanation even when it's dealing with information that's completely warped. What we already know and the mental models we have play a huge role in how we interpret these really altered experiences.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could these seemingly bizarre beliefs like Luke's Air Buddies thing in their own messed up way give us a peek into how our minds build and understand reality? What does it tell us about how much our past experiences shape us and how fragile our sense of self can be in the world? Maybe exploring other altered states could show us even more unique and personally convincing ways of seeing reality, each one shaped by a person's own history and understanding. Pretty mind-blowing stuff, huh?
Yeah, definitely.